And we're okay just from where we are, standing, and we'll okay.
Good evening, everyone. This is an absolutely fantastic turnout. I cannot believe the number of people who are here tonight. It's been a very hot day. It's a very hot evening. We've got the Queen's Baton Relay down the road. We've got the Scarecrow Festival here, and you've all turned out. This is really absolutely fantastic. Thank you all for coming out. Now, I don't want to say too much before we start, because you're not here to listen to me. You're here to listen to our very expert and very able panel. I'll introduce myself. I'm Margaret Brogan. I'm a local resident. I'm a guest campaigner. But you're here to listen to these people and ask them questions. What I would ask is, if you keep the questions direct and to the point, because it's not a platform for long political speeches, apart from these folk maybe, I don't know, but it's not a platform for long political speeches. What we would like is to have some questions asked of our panellists so that they can answer them, hopefully answer them to your satisfaction. One or two things I need to tell you before we start is that tonight's meeting will be published it's filmed for posting on YouTube. It will also be broadcast live. It's being live streamed, if that's the correct terminology. It's live streamed onto the Referendum website. So as long as you're all aware of that, it wasn't the publicity for it, but just to make sure everybody knows. And the housekeeping, as usual. The fire exits are here, here, and here. And the toilets, I've completely forgotten where they are. I think they're out that way. So it's extremely warm tonight, so I think we will try and keep everything quite direct and to the point. So first of all, I will introduce our speakers. I'm sure they're all known to you, but I will introduce first, we have Ruth Wishart, that I'm sure you all know. As I said to her earlier on tonight, I've admired you from afar for a very long time. And she said, I've heard that's the best way to do it. And she is absolutely right. There have actually been so many events I have been at that Ruth has chaired. I feel she should be here and I should be out at the back there somewhere. No, you've got a lot more to do than I have tonight, Ruth. So that's Ruth. You all know Ruth, our long career in print and broadcasting and so on. There's no need to add any more to that. And on my right hand, my next right hand, we have Dr. Philippa Whitford, who works in the NHS. She's a consultant surgeon. I don't know if you've seen Philippa's excellent YouTube video. It's about 15 minutes long and it's worth every penny. It's absolute gold. It's
penny?
Really
You mean I should be getting paid for it?
after the 18th. After the 18th, Philippa.
I'll hold you to that.
Well, I've no money.
Or I'll hold him to that.
Hold somebody to it, but not me. Philippa is actually a representative, apart from everything else, for Women for Independence. And Women for Independence were set up at the beginning of the referendum campaign to ensure that women had a voice in the referendum debate. And it has actually been very successful. As you can tell by our top table tonight, we've got 3 women and only 1 man, and we have a very large number of people here. A very large number of female people here, women people here. And last but absolutely not least, there's Blair Jenkins on my left side, who is the Chief Executive of Yes Scotland. He also has a long career in the media. You were head of news and current affairs in BBC and STV.
Yep.
I read just recently of it. I was actually quite surprised at that.
In a good way.
In a good way, yes. I thought, well, I think if we've got people who are so good at communication on side with us, media, women for independence, it just is, it's so absolutely important. So I don't really want to take up much more of your time. We will have our speakers will each speak for 10 minutes, and then the floor will be open. There will be a microphone will go around, a roving microphone. If you would please put your hand up if you have a question to ask. And I said, if we can keep the questions to the point and direct them to the speakers. Now, I don't intend to choose who is going to answer the questions, because they're all very talented people, and I'm sure that they're capable of answering whatever you ask. But I think one speaker will answer, and then if anyone else has anything to say, they can add it in. But if you don't want to say anything else, just let it go. So we'll try and keep things tripping along, because I say it is a very warm evening. So we shall go first with, I checked that Ruth was fine first for speaking. So if we could have what you're going to say to us, Ruth. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Margaret. First off, I want to thank you for my invitation to West Kilbride. I had a very happy Christmas here a couple of years ago with friends, and I was able to see exactly how brilliantly you've done with the designation of Craft Town, and I really must spend more time here in the summer when more of the places are open. And the other reason that I'm happy to be here is I think this is one of the most important decisions any of us are going to take in our adult lifetime, and I think it's important that we take every possible chance to debate the case for a yes vote. I should start off by saying that I've never been a member of a political party. I don't think it's appropriate for journalists to be members of political parties. And this issue in any case is not about party politics. That's a decision for May 2016. But while I don't think journalists should dabble in party politics, I am a very committed and passionate supporter of the Yes campaign. And I suppose, like a lot of people in this hall here tonight, I've been on a bit of a journey to Yes, and I'd like just to share some thoughts about that with you. And to share the conviction, which I think is very important, that no matter where we stand on the referendum, we're all still family on September the 19th, and we all cherish some of the same ambitions for our country. We all want tomorrow's Scotland, I think, to be a healthy, prosperous and outward-looking nation where our children and our grandchildren can fulfil their potential. The thing is, though, I can see little prospect of building that new Scotland, one resting basically on shared values and respect, as long as we're tied to Westminster policies, which in my view have become inequitable and profoundly divisive. I see little prospect of change to the better until we're able to control our own destiny here in Scotland and determine our own priorities. Do you know, one of the most dispiriting statistics I heard in recent weeks was from Oxfam. It was an Oxfam report, and it advised us that just 5 families in the UK are now worth the same as the poorest 20% of the entire population. Now that's quite a startling statistic, but it's symptomatic, I think, of a society where the gap between the have and the have-nots has continued to widen and widen quite dramatically in the last few years. And I think we ought to ponder the fact that unequal societies are also inherently unstable societies. There's a very important book which I'm sure some of you have read called The Spirit Level, and the authors made us understand how inequality was the godparent of social unrest and criminal behaviour, whilst conversely equality of opportunity offered social cohesion and greater community involvement. A couple of years back I served on the Christie Commission on the Future of Public Services in Scotland, and all the evidence we took underlined the urgency of involved communities being part of the solution for good public services. But in order to become involved as a community, you need to be freed from the day-to-day worries of financial concerns, which quite often sap people's energy and breed low aspiration. So I think we need to cure these deep divisions in our society, where some people, I think, now appear to be dwelling on a different planet. Chief executives in the UK FTSE top 100 countries companies now pay themselves 180 times the workforce wage, 180 times the average wage of their workforce. And the mantra from these chief executives is that top talent won't come for less than top dollar, that the eye-watering bonuses that they all demand are required to be paid, otherwise they're going to take their bat and their ball and hire themselves elsewhere. And I want to use a technical term here, ladies and gentlemen, that is self-serving rubbish. Of course, these CEOs carry huge responsibilities, but many people in this society carry huge responsibilities. The people who run major hospitals carry huge responsibilities. The people who run social services do so. It's a strange anomaly, you know, that the pay of nurses and teachers and firefighters and police officers, the very glue of our society, has to be pegged in the national interest, but boardroom pay has to be doubled and trebled for the same reason. I think I must have been off school the day in social studies where it was proved that the very rich can only be motivated to work by more money and the very poor can only be motivated by less. I want you to imagine for just a moment the local head teacher in West Kilbride demanding a bonus of more than his or her annual salary just for turning up at work. But at the heart of this argument, you know, and so many of the arguments around the referendum, is core values, personal values, corporate values, government values. I've never for a single second believed that social justice and economic prosperity are mutually exclusive concepts. Quite the reverse, in fact. But as a result of successive Westminster governments not reining in greed and not punishing gross malpractice, we've created, as I say, a bitterly divided society. Claim more benefit than the rules allow and your entire income can be stopped at the stroke of a pen. Run an illegal scheme in a large bank which defrauds its customers and brings the entire economy to its knees, and the courts and the jails will be spared your attendance. Quit a failing company as an outgoing CEO and you'll get a golden goodbye. But join the jobs market at entry level and you may now get a 0 hours contract with all the financial uncertainty that implies. Or you might be suddenly made redundant and find that job seekers' allowance is just about the lowest in Europe. Do you know, these are just some of the reasons that there are 4 times as many food banks in Scotland as there were just a year ago. We used to have just under 50, now we've got more than 400. How can that not shame us, ladies and gentlemen, in 2014 in Scotland? How can that not shame us? And yet spokespeople for the Westminster government repeatedly try to explain this away by saying there are more food banks because more people are trying to get free food. How dare they? What an appalling statement that is. I've been at these kitchens of last resort. I'm sure some of you have too. I've seen people in tears because they've been unable to put food on their own family's table. People for whom the idea of going to a food bank 2 or 3 years ago would have been quite unthinkable and beyond their worst nightmares. So it seems to me that the age of austerity only applies to one section of society. And then, of course, we've had the grotesque arrival of a bedroom tax. It's wrong, it's immoral, and it's not even workable. Even if everybody deemed to have a spare room were to say, OK, we'll downsize, they'd be unable to locate them. 9/10 of them would be unable to locate that kind of housing. But in any event, just what kind of society deems it acceptable to charge people extra for having somewhere for their kids to play, or the grandparents to visit, or sometimes to store equipment for a disabled member of their family? I don't want any policies like these to feature in Scotland's future. It's also a fact, you know, that benefit fraud is a tiny percentage of the Social Security bill. And it's a tiny percentage, as it happens, of what we lose in aggressive tax avoidance and tax evasion. In fact, the greatest cost to welfare by far is folks like me, senior citizens with a bus pass. But you're not going to find any politicians anytime soon calling pensioners social scroungers. It is true, of course, that housing benefit has spiralled, but it's spiralled largely in the southeast of England, where landlords have pushed up rents beyond the means of most people, and wealthy immigrants have pushed up house prices to unimaginable levels. And by the way, that's one area of immigration where you might be sure there'll not be a knock on the door at 6 a.m. in the morning. There's never going to be a van waiting to take the latest Russian oligarch to the airport. But there are parts of Scotland where we do need fresh talent and skills, and where we can and we should encourage overseas graduate students to stay and contribute to the Scottish economy. And it's a substantial economy we have here, you know, whatever the scaremongers continue to tell us. There are solid underpinnings making us the 14th wealthiest country in the developed world, rather ahead of the UK. And the oil and gas revenues about which we hear so much, they're really the icing on our economic cake. You know, in the question of North Sea resources, I'm always rather bemused that in a UK context, we've got a wonderful oil resource with a glittering future. But in a Scottish context, it's suddenly much too volatile an asset to be considered when calculating our national wealth and prospects. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got the capacity to be a prosperous, forward-looking, small European country, given our successes in life sciences, whisky exports and renewables. And on which point, on the point of renewables and energy generally, surely rekindling our engineering heritage through exciting developments like wave power and other renewables is a more sustainable and a more ethical way to go about increasing energy supply than handing fracking contracts to foreign developers. But leaving aside the economic battleground for the moment, people ask, quite legitimately, they ask, why change? Why alter the constitutional status quo? Why change an arrangement that works well? Well, you know, I don't think it does work well. To an extent, we've been protected by devolution from some of the worst decisions taken by the Westminster government. We haven't spent the last 40 years dismantling the NHS and tinkering endlessly with the school curriculum, as happens in England every time the late Mr. Gove had another light bulb go off in his head. Happily for us, or happily for English teachers, Mr. Cameron had a light bulb go off in his head today, and Mr. Gove is no more at education. But people also argue that we're all one big, happy British family, so why break it up? And I genuinely find this difficult to understand. Why would Scotland being restored to full nationhood affect our friendships and all our ties with our cousins and friends down south? My friends down south will remain exactly that on September the 19th. Just across the water, Norway and Sweden are distinctive small countries, but they're still Scandinavia. They're still good and close neighbours. Norway and Sweden and Denmark all have populations roughly the same as ours, and they, you know, were once part of an overarching union as well. But they've all felt more comfortable in modern times, determining their own destinies and forging their own relationships with bodies like the EU. In a documentary last week, the CEO of the Grangemouth complex told the presenter that he thought in a modern context, small countries often work best, not least because you have easier access to government. And he cited Switzerland as an example, Switzerland where he lives. Not exactly, I think you'll agree, an economic basket case. And then we've got the London factor, a huge power base draining energy from all the other constituent parts in the UK. Other parts of Britain can only dream of the billions poured into schemes like London Crossrail and the myriad huge infrastructure projects in the southeast. When they talk, you know, of the HS2 project going further north, they mean Crewe. When they talk of revitalising links between northern cities, they mean Manchester and they mean Leeds. Yet when I say I'm voting yes for a better, fairer Scotland, it's not because I don't care about people living in Liverpool or Newcastle or Leeds, because they're also the victims of policies geared to already wealthy parts of the nation. The difference is that we in Scotland have been given a quite unique opportunity to do something concrete to build a better country and a better society. A society where compassion is not a dirty word. And this can serve as an inspiration to our friends in the south. A modern internationalist nation, a country comfortable in its own skin and excited by the prospect of revitalising its skill base in areas like engineering, product design, bioscience and digital animation. We've been given a priceless, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to build a Scotland of which we can all be proud regardless of our personal politics, and to gain our independence not on the end of an AK-47, but with a simple pen and paper in the privacy of a polling booth. So I feel very privileged to be alive in 2014 and to be given the chance to say yes to a country we can all help to shape. I owe that yes, I think. I owe that commitment to the young people who will inherit tomorrow's Scotland. I hope many of you will feel able to join me on September the 18th in voting yes, because I hope none of you will have the difficult task of explaining to frustrated grandchildren what on earth made you vote no. Thank you.
Ruth, thank you very much for that. That was, it's just so full of such important points. I think the economy and welfare, it covered so much, Ruth, thank you. And next we have Philippa Whitford, please.
Thank you very much, as we're all going to keep saying all evening, thank you very much for coming in. I find it incredible the way people are turning out to these meetings. I've been kind of campaigning since the referendum was declared, but the first year was kind of handing out leaflets and doing Saturday stalls, and the meetings kind of started in January of this year when I ran my first Women for Indie Cafe in Troon. I've seen people come out on wet Monday nights, I've seen people come out on sunny Saturday afternoons here with Margaret and her team, and I've seen people come out on a Friday night. Now that's just incredible. We're talking Scotland here. And I'd like to thank you for coming here. And I think it just shows how important this is. Everyone's been talking for years. No one's interested in politics. No one wants to vote. This is the lie to that. Give us a politics where our voice makes any difference at all, and we'll turn out. We'll vote, we'll campaign, we'll discuss, and we'll debate. And I think this is something that we need to be really proud of, because this is happening in every community across Scotland. Now, I tend to speak for Women for Independence. I'm a breast cancer surgeon in Crosshouse Hospital at Kilmarnock. The NHS is full of women. Nurses are largely women. Not totally, but largely. Doctors are the other way around. Surgeons are very much the other way around. I spent the early part of my career being told exactly what we get told. You can't. Women can't do surgery. Monthly mood swings. You don't have the brain for it. You don't have the brawn for it. So I'm used to can't, and I'm here to show that absolutely, yes, we can. And yes, we're jolly well going to. Now, obviously, this is a mixed meeting. In the Women for Indie meetings, we have tables and we have cake. Sorry, guys, we do. And I have to say that it works rather well, and any of the ladies who've been to a Women for Indie Cafe will know that. And that is one of the great things, is that women have got their space in this campaign, and we've had our chance to speak out. Now, I wouldn't even be attending a meeting like this if this was an election, let alone up here on my hind legs speaking at one. But this is so crucial. I am in no doubt that this is our one chance for this vote in my lifetime. I think eventually it would come again, because the alternative is never going to fit Scotland. But we will never get it on these terms. They thought we'd be thrashed. They thought support for independence was maybe 25, 28%. That's why we're not going to bother with Devo Max, which lots of people might have quite liked. We're just going to give them a good hammering, and that'll shut them up. Because the polls have got closer, that has caused a lot of people in Better Together and the UK government to get very nervous. So don't be thinking, I'll not do it now. I'll maybe do it in 5 years. I'll maybe do it in 10. We won't get that opportunity. I got the chance to work in Gaza and Lebanon as a medical volunteer for 2 years. And I'm still in touch with Palestinian doctors that I worked with. And obviously they're going through absolute hell at the moment. And they're all congratulating me. I haven't even dared to explain on my Facebook that we might vote no, because they just wouldn't be able to conscience that we would have the opportunity to take control of our own futures, and we would say no to that. And we need to think about that. We've got so used to, why bother? UK, okay. Well, working as a doctor for years in Glasgow, I would say UK is not okay. And in health, a lot of the problems we see in health come to do with the start in life young people get. If they are poor, if they have poor educational opportunities, they have poor life chances. They then make poor life choices. They end up in prison, they end up in drugs, they end up in alcohol. And unless we can change that, and I can't change that in the NHS, I'm there to catch you when you fall, but I can't make you healthy. That's something you need to control the economy. You need to be able to set a living wage. You need to control welfare so that people actually have the chance of health. Because health is totally different from an absence of illness. I actually work in the National Illness Service. Okay? And that's what we want to change. We want to have a healthier community. But saying that I work in the National Illness Service, I think most of us treasure that. And it was really important to me that I realised that we weren't hearing very much about the NHS in this debate until someone from Better Together had the cheek to say that if we voted yes, we would leave the UK and therefore leave the NHS and have no NHS at all. And I'm sorry, it's their own fault. That's what got me on my feet and got me speaking out as loudly as I possibly can. That just simply isn't true. The Scottish NHS has been separate since 1948. We were formed by a different Act of Parliament, and we have always had a different organisation. I know that because I trained in Glasgow and I did my first job in Glasgow. And then I went back where I come from, to Belfast, to start my surgery, and I suddenly discovered my pension had moved. And when I came back, I had to move it back because it is a totally separate organisation. Now, you wouldn't have known that because the UK NHS worked completely as if it was one. You could be sent anywhere to see anyone. It was Mrs. Thatcher who did for that first, and that was in 1991 when she set up trusts. And when I came here in 96, we had North Ayrshire Trust and we had Ayr Trust Hospital, and they were meant to be rivals. Now, we went back together in 99, and I would say it took a good 10 years to heal that rivalry. It wasn't real money, but GPs were kind of pretending to buy services. We were meant to compete with each other. We had the wonderful opportunity that in 99, with devolution, that just stopped. Very quickly, we went back to being a single, unified Scottish NHS. And we have gone completely in that direction of cooperating, collaborating, doing shared projects right across Scotland to improve the healthcare that we have. Now, people who are sitting here thinking, oh, well, I'm a Labour supporter, I'm going to vote no, and then we'll get Ed Miliband in just one more Christmas, as he likes to say, and he'll save it all. It was Tony Blair who introduced private companies into the NHS in England with independent treatment centres. It was him who saddled health boards with enormous private finance initiative costs that are driving hospitals to bankruptcy down south. And what we've now seen in this last year is gobsmacking. And the reason I spoke out is because you don't hear about it. The media up here aren't covering it. The newspapers weren't covering it. The BBC up here weren't covering it. And you need to know how far they've gone, how far it is from the NHS that you would recognise. In the last year, what has happened is instead of a single NHS England, what we have is little commissioning groups of GPs, and they must put every service they commission out to tender, and they must judge equally between NHS and private. And if private are able to say, no, we'll do that cheaper for you, Gov, they have to give the contract there. 70% of all the contracts awarded in the first year have gone to private companies. Virgin is the biggest, but there's about 15 of them, including Atos and Care UK and all sorts of health companies, many of whom are kind of pals of David Cameron, many of whom are donors to the Conservative Party, and many of them whom are doing very nicely out of this. Now, I don't believe in private healthcare. I don't believe that people should have to have money to get treated. To me, the NHS is the ultimate universal benefit. You talk about the bus passes, but the NHS is not just for the wealthy, but nor is it just for the poor. And that's why it's so good. If the NHS was only the mop-up health service and wealthy people all went to Ross Hall, there'd be nobody paying any attention to the quality of care that the NHS delivers. So well-off people might go privately if they're having a straightforward operation, but believe me, when the chips are down, it's the NHS that they're in. If they have a huge accident, if they're ill, if they have complex cancer, it's the NHS that they're in. And that is the wonderful thing about it. When lots of politicians talk about, oh, we can't have a something for nothing culture, we can't have everybody getting benefits. The NHS is the ultimate universal benefit. And that's what you should be doing, is delivering a guarantee to your citizens of something they can depend on. And that's what we've lost. It's not just this. Westminster believes in the market. They've believed in the market for the last 30 years. Everything's for sale, nothing is sacred. Not the water that comes out of your tap, not the education of your children, not your health care. And what's happening within the NHS in England is these little groups are all free to make different decisions. So you have absolutely postcode care happening. But the hospital have to compete with each other, and they have to compete with the private companies. So this isn't the pretendy competition that Mrs. Thatcher set up. Gloves are off. This is real. This is hospitals fighting to survive. They're saddled with PFI, they have huge debts, and they only get paid for the patients they treat. So they are now in competition with the hospital down the road. They're certainly not going to sit there and work out what's the best way to share our patients or look after them. Have you ever seen Marks and Spencers and Debenhams sit down and work out how do we improve customer care across our shops? No. They are now all rivals. And I've been written to and seen articles from Breast Cancer Campaign saying that the standards for breast cancer care in England are not being collected, not being audited, and not being published, because they don't want that out there, because they're rivals. Everything is about competition, everything is about money, and the management in these hospitals are utterly focused on money. And that's what happened in Mid-Staffs, was the management was just focused on money and becoming a foundation hospital, because that way they would get more financial gains that they could play. Now, what we've done here in Scotland is we've had the opportunity to go in a quality direction. Now, I don't want anyone to think I think the NHS in Scotland's perfect. It's not even slightly perfect. But there's nothing wrong with it that privatisation would improve. Quite the reverse. Because I specialise in breast cancer, what we have done, and we've had standards for breast cancer care since 2001, and they are audited every year, and we meet every year right across the country, and we look at the challenges we face, we look at the things we haven't achieved, we discuss, well, I had that problem last year, and this was how we solved it. So we share ideas. You don't do that if you are business rivals. And that's what the NHS is down south. It's made up of business rivals. Now, how will that affect us? Well, number one would be that there is a threat that the Barnett formula may get taken away altogether. The Welsh Government and some of the Conservative backbenchers are desperate to get rid of it. And that would take over $4 billion out of our budget. The other thing is that even if it survives, we get a proportion of what Westminster spends on a publicly delivered service. We don't get a Barnett consequential for Crossrail or the New London Sewers or HS1 or HS2. It's only things where it's a public service. So as healthcare in England goes on and on dwindling and being privatised and franchised out to these private companies, our health funding will just get smaller and smaller. It's estimated that in the early 2020s, half of NHS England will be being run by these companies like Virgin and Atos. There's an even bigger danger because the EU is currently negotiating a free trade agreement with America, and the UK are part of that. And the UK government have not chosen to try and exempt their NHS. And if that free trade agreement goes through, then any part of what a government runs that is a market, the American companies must be allowed into. And that means we could see a whole flood of American health companies coming in. And frankly, any of you who know anyone in the States, I don't think that you would value that. So my feeling is not just about the danger that would happen in a year's time or 2 years' time. We've had the NHS for 66 years. I think if we want to have an NHS in Scotland in 66 years' time, when our children are grown up and our grandchildren are grown up, we need to be able to control that. Why would we have control on the 18th and then say, oh, these decisions are too awkward, the oil's too volatile, I don't like making big decisions. I'm not genetically programmed to make political decisions. We'll just let the big boys make all the decisions. Because I don't think that we believe the market is king. I think we believe in each other. I think we are communitarian. Now, I also believe people in the north of England would be more of our line. But we can't help them by staying in the UK. How we can help them is by taking control of our own future, our own economy, our own state, our own public services, and showing there is an alternative. We can run a good economy, we can run a sustainable economy, and we can then share that economy. We can pay a living wage, we can pay fair taxes, and we can keep these things that we all consider are the jewels of the United Kingdom. I agree with David Cameron. The two greatest things that Britain has done is the welfare state and the NHS. But we're not wanting to leave them. It's him that's leaving them. It's him that's wrecking them. So I think it's absolutely crucial that we take control. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be milk and honey. And it will not land in your lap on the 25th of March, the day after Independence Day. We're the generation who get to do the choice, and we're making that choice for all the generations that come after. But we're also the generation who have to do the work, and you need to realise that. But what we're about is going through change, going through upheaval, so that 10 years from now, we won't be just in the same old, same old. We'll be somewhere better. Thank you.
Say thank you again. That was to put in as a former employee of the NHS who worked in the NHS during the Thatcher years and the fragmentation or the attempted fragmentation. That speaks so much to me that we're away from that now, and we really need to stay away from it and carry on with what we're doing. So our one male panel member has waited very patiently, Blair Jenkins.
Thank you. Thank you, Margaret. One of the many great pleasures and privileges of doing this job is I get to appear at meetings like this alongside such fantastic speakers as Ruth and Philippa, and it really is tremendous to see their passion and their enthusiasm. They are among the very best advocates for the Yes cause. I'll talk a little bit about the campaign itself, because I think they've both set out some of the very compelling reasons why we believe a yes vote is an essential vote for Scotland in September. I'll talk a little bit about the campaign, and then we'll move into, I think, the part of the evening which is the most important for us and for you, which is when we have a conversation and we get into questions and talking about the various issues that have arisen in the course of the referendum campaign. I think the Yes campaign, the Yes Scotland campaign, is very well represented on the panel tonight. None of us are politicians. None of us has any history of being involved in political campaigns. Like so many people in the Yes campaign, this is just not one we could sit out. We know how important this is. We know how crucial this is. And all over Scotland, right around the country, in every corner of Scotland, many, many tens of thousands of people are now working actively for a Yes outcome every day. There are meetings like this happening all over the country. People are out on stalls, they're knocking doors. I was knocking some doors in West Kilbride today, which was very encouraging. And there are, as Philippa mentioned, there are referendum cafes, all sorts of activity happening. We know that we have, by a country mile, the most energised and active and numerous volunteers and campaign. We know that we have a real, genuine grassroots campaign right around Scotland. And I very firmly believe that one of the key factors in producing a yes majority on September 18 will be that greater level of commitment and energy and enthusiasm that we see from yes people right around the country. I don't think it would be an exaggeration to say it's such a momentous historic point in the lives of all of us. I very much take Philippa's point that it's sometimes said to me, oh well, Scotland might not vote yes this time, but would probably vote yes the next time. We cannot at all rely on there being a next time. We know that the question that we're being asked in September is in itself quite a short one. Should Scotland be an independent country? I mean, I think you have to commend the Electoral Commission for boiling the whole issue down to 6 words. I think as a journalist, I admire their ability to really reduce it to that very short sentence. But behind the short question is that much, much longer question, much, much more profound question about what kind of society do we want to be? You know, what are our values? What are our priorities? What's most important to us? What kind of Scotland do you want to see for your children, your grandchildren, the generations to come? And I think what is moving people towards yes in this campaign is going through the process of trying to answer that question honestly, and which outcome in September is most likely to produce the kind of Scotland you want. And in the end, that's all we can ask people to do. If people go through that process honestly and arrive at the decision that's right for them, then we can ask them to do no more than that. But I genuinely believe that as people think it through and think about the difference we could make with the powers of an independent country, as opposed to being stuck in the UK with a direction of travel that looks to be consistent irrespective of who is in government in Westminster. As people look at those two choices, those two outcomes, I think it all stacks up in favour of a yes vote. There's only one bit of audience participation I do, if you'll bear with me and humour me for this. I'd like to ask you a question tonight, which I've been asking right around Scotland at gatherings of this size and smaller and larger. I wouldn't dream of asking you, how you intend to vote or what you're thinking right now at the referendum. I'd ask a slightly different question, which is this. We all of us are having conversations about the referendum, about independence, with friends and family and neighbours and the people that we work with, the people we socialise with. So I'd just like to ask you, if I may, and just by showing a hand, from your own circle of acquaintance, can I ask if there are people in the hall who know of individuals who were intending to vote yes, but are now saying they're going to vote no? Do you know anyone who's moved from yes to no? I've got one cameraman and a chap at the back. You'll see where I'm going with this. I'm now going to reverse the question asked, and it's honestly it's an honest response I'm looking for. Can I ask you, do you know anyone who was intending or thinking they were going to vote no and is now intending to vote yes? Right. I would say that looks like about 2/3 of the hall. And in all honesty, that's normally about the proportion of any audience, irrespective of its composition, that I get right around the country. And I only do that because it demonstrates in a sort of highly visual way the evidence from right around Scotland, which is the only direction of travel in this campaign, is from no to yes. One of the smartest things we did, and I can say this because it wasn't my idea, was that, and I know there'll be some people in the hall who are already yes supporters and probably knocking doors for the yes campaign. The first thing we ask people is not how you're going to vote. The first thing we ask people to do is to place themselves on a scale from 1 to 10. Where 1 is completely against the idea of independence and 10 is completely in favour of the idea of independence. The good thing about that is it almost encourages people to visualise where they are on that scale. And what we find more and more is people see themselves as moving up that scale. It's not at all unusual for me now to meet people, when people come up to me and say, you spoke to me, 6 months ago in Alloa or whatever, and there was a 2 or a 3 then, I'm a 5 or a 6 or a 7 now. And it's just happening right around Scotland. People are visualising themselves moving up that scale, moving further up towards a yes vote. Every time we do that work and collate the returns, the average score keeps coming back higher. So the average within that 1 to 10 spectrum keeps coming back higher. So we know we're moving people in our direction. We know that the only direction of travel is towards yes. And I believe that as we get closer to the referendum itself and people discuss it more, and there will be 1 million, 2 million, 3 million conversations right around Scotland between now and September 18. The more conversation, the better as far as this campaign is concerned. The more people talk about it, the more they get their heads around the issues, then the more they come our way. Now, Ruth and Philippa have talked about some of the compelling arguments for voting yes. The one thing I think it's always very important to get across, and I know there are folk who think that there's been too much discussion of numbers and the economy in this debate, and I know it gets a bit dry and technical sometimes, but it is just one of the main things we always wish to get over because it is so fundamentally important. It was the Financial Times newspaper, I have to tell you, no great enthusiasts for Scottish independence, which reported earlier this year that an independent Scotland would immediately move into the top 20 nations in the world in terms of wealth per capita, and would begin life as an independent country with a stronger set of public finances than the rest of the UK. We know, and I won't go into many numbers, we know that 7 of the top 10 best performing economies in the world are countries of a similar size to Scotland, same size or smaller. We know that not just for 5 years or 10 years, but for more than 30 years now, in every single year, the Scottish economy has produced more economic output, more economic value per head of population than the UK economy. So we know we start life as a very, very strong economy. What we make of the future will be what we make of the future. We'll get a lot of stuff right, we'll no doubt get some things wrong. Being independent doesn't mean that every decision that Scotland makes will be the right decision. But you know what? They'll be our decisions. And I think it's much easier to put up with the mistakes you make yourselves rather than the mistakes that other people impose on you. And I do believe, as my colleagues have said, that there are, in this independence referendum, I think there are pull factors for people in moving to yes, and there are push factors. Lots of people are very attracted by the vision of an independent Scotland, the notion of the kinds of things that we could achieve, the differences that we could make. But I think also more and more, a lot of people who've moved towards yes, and I come across this daily or weekly, I mean, it's a very, very regular thing, is people have given up believing that the direction of travel of the UK can now really be changed. Somewhere in the last 30 to 40 years, there seems to have been a profound shift towards regarding public services as a regrettable expense and regarding people as disposable units of labour. And that overall political direction of travel in the UK, I don't think shows any signs of being changed, irrespective of who wins the next election and irrespective of any likely government to be formed at Westminster. So the Yes campaign moves towards September 18, and in no sense complacent, confident that the direction of travel is in our favour, confident that we're getting the tone of the campaign right. We've now had 2 independent opinion polls from separate companies which said that twice as many people regard the Yes campaign as being the more effective campaign as regard the No campaign as being the more effective campaign. What I take from that is that people are more attracted by what we have to say. They can see that we're trying to run an honest campaign, a positive campaign. All the energy and all the ideas are coming from our side of the debate. The job for us now, and tonight is part of that process, the job for us is to convert, I think, the desire most people in Scotland have to see an independent country and to vote yes, and to begin to create the kinds of social change that my colleagues have talked about. It's converting all of that energy and all of that positivity and that hope into a vote on September 18. I do believe we will achieve that, and I do believe that it's often said that the best way to predict your own future is to create your own future. And I do very strongly believe that on September 18, the people of Scotland will vote to create their own future. Thank you very much.
Blair, thank you very much for that. That was a bit of a surprise, that question that came from Blair about do we know anyone who's moved from yes to no or no to yes. I was out door-to-door campaigning with Blair this afternoon, and one lady I spoke to, when I told her what I was there for, said, no, I'm not really thinking of voting yes. She said, but come in and talk to me anyway. And we sat and chatted for a wee while, and then I thought, I wonder if she's going to change her mind. And I said, would you think about voting yes? And she said, I tell you what, I will. She said, I'll vote yes. And you could have knocked me over with a feather. I was absolutely amazed. So I know more than that lady, but it's usually an awful lot harder than that. It is usually the kind of nudging folk along the scale, but it was quite gratifying, to be honest with you. And I said thank you very much and left. But now we come to the part of the evening where I will invite you, the audience, to, as I said earlier on, if you would please have your questions ready. There'll be someone going round with a roving microphone. So if you have questions to ask, please just put your hands up, wait until the microphone comes to you. I'm just looking around to see who the person is with the microphone. It's yourself. Hello. So hands up. Question. We'll just take one question at a time. I know some people take 3, but my memory is not that great. So if we can have one question at a time, hands up for everybody. Have we got anyone to start us off? This is always a hard one. Just, gentleman over here.
Ta-da! Men and technology.
Yeah.
Dependence, we want independence, but we'll have a significant dependence if we stick with the pound and with the panel's opinion.
Would you like to take this?
Yeah.
We're voting for you, Blair.
Right, okay. I'll kick off on that. Did everybody catch that eventually? Yeah, it's okay. It's on the currency issue, which is one that comes up a lot. And would we really be an independent country if we continue to use the pound, because that would imply a degree of dependency, I think was the question. I would say, in all honesty, and it's funny, we've all become currency experts in the last 2 years. I suspect that 2 years ago it wasn't really something we really thought about, and now we've all studied currency and read up about currency. And when you do, and when you look at all the options, and I must admit, I took some persuading initially, but once you go through the process of looking at the options and what's best for Scotland, and actually what's best for the rest of the UK, because I personally believe that one of the most important things after a yes vote is that we have very good relations with the rest of the UK. I fundamentally and honestly believe that we will, and I think sharing a currency will be part of that. Now, you'll know that, I'm sure you've seen some of the arguments for this. The most compelling argument for me about retaining the pound, continuing to use the pound, is not adding the additional costs to businesses that trade across the border. It's a very, we know the rest of the UK is our biggest trading partner. We're the second biggest trading partner. Scotland's the second biggest trading partner for the rest of the UK. So all that money, goods, services flowing across the border, to add currency transaction costs to both sides of the border at a time when we're just essentially emerging from a very serious recession looks like something that if you could avoid, you would avoid. So you start from that position. It's also, I think, a compelling argument that Scotland and the rest of the UK will have a lot of things that we need to agree on and negotiate. I think the contribution that the Scottish economy makes, we're an export-based economy to a much larger extent than the rest of the UK. The contribution of North Sea oil and other exports to the overall balance of payments in these islands is very substantial, and I think is another reason why we should stay in a sterling zone. I'm also strongly of the view, and again you'll know this has been discussed, that having been involved in a few mergers and acquisitions in my time in commercial life, when you come to end the union, then there has to be an equitable division of the assets and the liabilities of that union, and agreements on how it's going to be, these are going to be resolved. And we cannot have a position where Scotland agrees to take up a share of the liabilities of the UK, which, as you probably know, are very considerable in terms of the UK's inherited debt position. If we're picking up a share of the liabilities, then we must be entitled to a share of the assets. The pound is as much ours as anybody else's. Scotland has contributed to the way that currency is now internationally regarded, its international reputation, its brand value, if you like. So why we should unilaterally give that up, I think, is a question that I have not heard answered satisfactorily by any UK politician. So there are other options, and I have colleagues who argue for other options. I myself am of the view that that staying in a currency union, using the pound within the overall arrangement, which is it's a depoliticised currency zone now, with the way the Bank of England is governed, I think that's the best arrangement for Scotland.
Can I just pitch in? I think that I'm a bit less afraid if we don't end up in a currency union, as we've all been told we're not allowed to have a currency union. Being from Ireland, Southern Ireland hung on to the pound for years. Living in the north, we had pounds and punts, and lots of shops just took them interchangeably. When they were moving to the euro, they took pounds, punts and euros, and it just wasn't a big deal. My husband is German, and the people in East Germany, as part of unification, they were going the other way, was they had to change from Ostmarks, Eastmarks, to Deutschmarks, and within a few years to euros. We've all lived through a change of currency, well, those of us of a certain age, because we went through decimalisation at the beginning of the 70s, and the sky did not fall. So if they, dig their heels into the sandpit and say, no, we said you can't have it and you can't have it, we would keep the pound. It's an international, tradable currency. They cannot stop us using the pound. They can stop us having a currency union where we share the bank and the regulation and the City of London and all the things I'd be quite happy to wave goodbye to. But they cannot stop us using the pound. And people need to realise that.
And if I could just put one more PS in, because I sense that underlying what you asked, sir, was the thought that if the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England was calling the shots, then we would, in the words of the current Governor of the Bank of England, be ceding sovereignty. And I take that point because, of course, at the moment, the economy is largely run for the benefit of the southeast of England rather than reflecting Scottish priorities, and I think there's a danger that would continue. I'm quite relaxed about Scotland having its own currency, though I recognise the inherent dangers, but I also recognise what Blair says, that it would be rather perverse of England to want to lumber itself with transaction taxes that it didn't need. However, I'm agnostic to the extent that if the currency union happens, I can see the rationale for it. If it doesn't happen, I'm no fear about our own currency.
No, that's good.
There's a lady here who would like to ask a question. No, not hide the fact she's Margaret Partridge. She's across the road from me. I haven't seen her for a long time, and it's good to see her tonight.
It was actually Ms Whitworth, when you were talking about Europe and the difference that the European Union is making, which as far as the United States is concerned. Now, I understand that if an independent Scotland would want to remain in Europe, which I kind of think is quite a good idea, does that then lay us open to the United States coming looking for privatisation in our health service?
No, it doesn't. If you have a totally public service delivered NHS, that is automatically exempt. They can only force their way in to somewhere where there is already a market. So because the NHS in England is now completely market driven, they can go in there. One of the problems that we might have, that Ian McWhirter commented in his column, which I hadn't even thought is a step further. If we vote no and we are there for just a region of the UK, there is actually the possibility that they would be able to say this is an anomaly. The UK as a country has a market NHS, and they could force their way in, and that's even more scary than I had thought of.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment? No, fine. Okay. We have some more questions, please. Well, we have a lady down. Oh, sorry. There's someone up at the back, and then I'll come to yourself. Okay, gentleman at the back, and then.
Yeah, it was just to do with the NHS and the TIPS. This is the free trade agreement with America. The worst thing about that is not that it's free trade, is that the corporations have a higher prestige than the sovereign countries. And they can sue the countries if they don't get the profit that they expect to get. Now, the Scottish Parliament, if there was a yes vote, would have no, even if they passed any law they wanted, would have no protection if, under the proposed constitution by the Scottish Government, if the EU signs that treaty. Now, you say it's not privatised here. Every GP surgery in Scotland's a private company. Every pharmacy is a private company. Blood and samples get sent round in taxis, private companies. So there's certainly doubt there that we can protect ourselves. And my concern is the Scottish Constitution, after a yes vote, is going to take sovereignty away from us.
I don't understand how the Scottish Constitution could take sovereignty away from us when we actually have no sovereignty and no constitution at all. I mean, I totally take your point, but I don't think that American taxi drivers are wanting to come in and compete with us. These guys are interested in big business. So it's the equivalent of United Health, who Simon Stevens, the head of NHS England, used to work for, would want to come in like Virgin is and taking over services. Now, one of the recent ones that has just gone out is Staffordshire has put its cancer care and its palliative care out for tender. Now, because I work in that business, I know how complicated that is across multiple teams. And yet they're going to invite companies in who do not do that. And they are going to take over NHS facilities, because you can't just build a linear accelerator to deliver radiotherapy. So it will be premises we have built with our tax money that these companies will take over. And what you say about TIPS is absolutely right, that the companies can sue. And that's something that all the governments will face, which is things like public health. Philip Morris is suing Australia because of plain packaging of cigarettes. We could be, obviously we've already got no smoking in public places, but obviously we're trying to get plain packaging. We're trying to get minimum alcohol prices. And a lot of people within the health world see this TIPS, as it is, that's the initials for the free trade agreement, as an absolute disaster. So, I mean, a lot of us would not agree with that in a general sense, and certainly feel that if it goes ahead, there have to be huge caveats in it. But at the moment, we would have no influence. We have no voice in Europe. We have no seat in Europe. So we can't even raise any issues. So I don't see how having an independent country and a constitution that would protect things like this would take sovereignty away. We don't have any at the moment.
I think to you, on the matter of the constitution,
law made by Scottish people.
The Constitution is only a draft at the moment, so that's something you're worried about. Make sure you feed it in.
Could I make the point about the Constitution, sir? Because you're talking about the Constitution taking away sovereignty. We have no Constitution yet. The Constitution is not the prerogative of any one political party. The Constitution at the moment is out for widespread consultation across Scotland. The Constitution that emerges is not a Constitution that's going to be lifted out of a draft in Scotland's future. It's going to be a Constitution that the people of Scotland have signed up for collectively. In addition to which, one of the things that the foundation of this new constitution is, the only line that you need to carry forward with you is the Scottish people will be sovereign. And I think that's a very important advance on a UK situation where there's no written constitution, which means that every time they want to do something, they just create a new precedent. I'd like these things in black and white, and I'd like the fact that the Scottish people will be sovereign in black and white. So Philippa is quite right. If you're interested in making sure that the Constitution reflects your priorities, get stuck in there. Doesn't belong to anybody but us.
It does say the people are sovereign, but it also says that sovereignty is subjective.
But that is not the post-referendum.
The interim Scottish Constitution.
No, it's not. It's a draft that's out
that's
for
what
consultation.
It's called on the Scottish Government website.
Yeah, that's from them. But it is out for consultation, and every single person in this hall should be going on to it, reading it, spotting things that are weaknesses, and feeding that in. This should be a constitution written by all the people of Scotland. They have only put a draft out to get the momentum going, to get the discussion going.
In addition to which, that's the government of the day just now. The next vote that matters, though it won't, in my view, matter nearly as much as September the 18th, the next vote that matters is the vote in 2016, when everybody in this room and everybody in Scotland can choose the government that they want, that they feel most comfortable with. That's when you have that argument, when it becomes a party political matter. At the moment, it's not. The 18th of September is about Scotland. It's not about any of Scotland's parties.
Okay. Thank you.
John, there is a lady down here. Sorry to keep you running around. Just here. This lady here. Yep, second row.
Hello. My question is about the campaign itself. It's good that there are so many people coming out to the public meetings, but most people in Scotland will be getting their information from the BBC. and it seems to me that the BBC is not covering the Yes campaign very well. What do you think you can do about that?
We give you Blair.
Right. I think, well, there are lots of ways, there are lots of, ways in which this campaign is being conducted, and there are lots of ways in which people are getting information. As far as the broadcasters are concerned, they have an absolute obligation to impartiality. If there's an item in a news bulletin or a programme which we can look at and say that hasn't been fair to us, we can complain about that item, we can get it corrected in future bulletins, we can get it changed. We don't have the same power with newspapers, unfortunately, who are not subject to the same requirement. But with broadcasters, there are levers we can pull, buttons we can push if we're unhappy.
I'm sorry,
Go.
I have to interrupt you.
Yeah.
If you listen to any of the announcements that come out from Report in Scotland, what they will say, when you listen to Report in Scotland, they will start with a banner headline. Not saying the no campaign, but Scotland cannot do this after the referendum if they vote yes.
Yeah.
Scotland cannot do that, says so-and-so. And then there will be about 5 minutes of that, and then a little bit on the end that's about, and Mr. Salmon from the Yes campaign says it will not be so. And that's it. Now, I love the BBC, and I'm sickened by it at the moment.
Okay. I mean, what I'm saying is, because this comes up quite a lot, as you might expect, I know a lot of the people who work at the BBC. I was, as Margaret said, I mean, I spent quite a number of years as head of news and current affairs at BBC Scotland. I know quite a lot of people who work there. Journalists, by and large, and I think Ruth might agree with me because she was also quite a lot of history with the BBC. Journalists, on the whole, try and do their job. And if you're an individual journalist and you come to a story, you come to a programme with a political agenda, people spot you coming a mile off, you know. They really do. I know. Right? Sure.
I don't think it's the journalists. I think it's those much above the journalists. I think they make the decisions.
Well, you see, again, I can only tell you my own experience. I mean, you just don't get told from the top of the organisation what to do. I worked for the BBC for many years. It just never, honestly, it never ever happens. You never get told, by the way, Blair, here's a line for next week. This is a line we're taking up. It never ever happens.
I'm going to break the habit of a recent lifetime and slightly disagree with Blair. I think the last thing Blair said is absolutely kosher. I never, ever was told what the line on a programme would be. And I don't think anybody's telling my successors what the line will be. I think the problem is with news selection. And that's what happens, not just in the BBC, but it happens in newspapers too. A report comes out last week, it was about oil prices. And it was a nuanced report. And it was from the Office of Budget Responsibility. It was a nuanced report, and it had lots of ifs and buts and caveats, and there was a whole lot of information came out on the back of it from other noted experts in that field. But it was what was selected that made the bias, in my view, by both newspapers and television. They selected as gospel the most negative nugget they could find in that. And that's happening a lot. I think that is happening a lot, and I find that, as a journalist, really offensive.
Yeah.
I see it happening particularly in print. I'm not watching an awful lot of the BBC at the moment. I'm on the road most of the time. But I get the Herald, and I notice in the Daily Herald that there will be a 3-inch banner headline in the front, as the lady said, you know, we'll all fall in the sea, we'll starve, the lights will go out, you can't do it.
You forgot about the killing of the firstborn.
Sorry, I forgot about that. Whereas when we had Graham Avery, professor who is part of the European Commission, who has been part of the accession process for 20 out of the 28 countries, saying, yeah, it'll be a lot of paperwork, it'll be a right pain in the neck, but of course you won't be outside the EU. That gets about an inch on page 9. When Standard & Poor's say Scotland would probably get our highest rating, that's on page 7, about an inch and a half high. And it's this selection of hiding way in the middle of the paper with no headline, anything that would support that Scotland is strong. And even sometimes what you'll see is an article that's got both sides, and yet the banner headline says, you know, Scotland would fall into the sea. And when you read the article, you can hardly see how the two have been put together. So to me, I see print as much worse, but that may be because I've just stopped watching a lot of the BBC.
Just to add a little bit to conclude on your question, I think Ruth has got a valid point, which is that broadcasters, and I suppose the BBC is the most obvious of the two, because broadcasters have cut back quite heavily on the staffing and resources in programmes, there's an extent to which they probably follow the newspaper's story selection and newspaper type agenda more than they might have previously. But as I say, we do have the ability to require correction by broadcasters or require them to adjust the balance of an item. And that does happen. We don't make a song and dance about it or talk about it publicly, but if we go and make a case that something has not been done properly, we can get it corrected. My view is, as we get closer to the vote, I think broadcasting is going to be hugely important, because I think once we get into the major debates, the major set-piece debates towards the end of the campaign, I think at that point, the final 6-7 weeks of the campaign is when an awful lot of people in Scotland are really going to be tuning in for the first time. We get this feedback all the time from people who say, well, yeah, I'm not really following you yet, but you know, the final few weeks I'll pay attention then. With a polling company I was talking to recently who said to me that they thought almost 50% of the population in Scotland, in their phrase, it's not a phrase I would use, their phrase was still up for grabs, by which they meant either have not decided how they're going to vote, or are not absolutely firm in their choice and could still change their minds. So I think those final weeks, when broadcasting will become the key forum, and those big debates are going to be very, very important. I think that's going to be very significant, potentially a great advantage for us. But of the four parts of the media landscape, if you like, or the communications landscape, I think we win in terms of grassroots activity and in terms of the campaign that we're running around the country. I think we win in social media and in what happens in terms of the various websites and the various online supporters of independence, and you're probably aware of who some of these are. We're much, much stronger in social media. We definitely have an uphill struggle with much of the Scottish press. Some of them are giving us a fairer showing than we might have expected. Whether that's for journalistic reasons or commercial reasons, I think is an interesting question. But there are some titles which are certainly being slightly more balanced than one would have been the case probably 10 or 20 years ago. Broadcasting, we do have an absolute right to fair treatment, and it's something we do insist on and we can insist on. I'm not saying it's perfect all the time.
Thank you, Blair. We'll move on to another question. Have we any more hands up for questions?
Yep. Back right.
There's a gentleman up here, over left-hand side. Would you just keep your hand up until I point at you? That's fine. I think John's got you now. And there's another gentleman down here for afterwards. And there was a lady too. I'm just trying to line up. Was there a lady down here? Had her hand up as well. Yourself, yeah. Yeah. So can I have your question?
Myself?
You've got yes.
Yes, thank you. I suspect, unlike the majority of people in the hall tonight, I still haven't made up my mind how I'm going to vote, and that's why I'm attending as many of these meetings as possible. The speakers, all three of them, have emphasised the importance of the decision we're going to take in September. It's a one-off decision. It's not like voting for Labour in the North Ayrshire Council, and you know, if we don't like them, 5 years later we vote SNP and get a change. This is it. It seems to be, therefore, that we've got to think not 1 year ahead or 5 year ahead or 10 year ahead. We've got to say, what's Scotland going to be like in 50 years or 100 years' time? And it seems to me that the most important thing in that time scale is the economy. How is an independent Scotland going to generate the wealth to give us the first-class health service, the first-class education system, the first-class social security system? And this is what I still need to be convinced about. And I haven't heard any of the speakers tonight talking about how Scotland is going to continue to be among the top 20 wealthiest countries by the end of this century. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want me to go?
Yes, please.
Well, I think we touched on it, but very happy to talk about it in more detail, because you're absolutely right. It's a very crucial part of the debate. We go back to the point I think Ruth made, which is to say that a lot of this debate often focuses on the North Sea oil industry. The North Sea oil industry is a fantastic asset for us to have, but it's not the underpinning of the case, the economic case for independence. If North Sea oil didn't exist, then the economic output per head of population in Scotland is almost exactly equivalent to the rest of the UK. We start life with a stronger economy in terms of our domestic economic product than the rest of the UK have. We have lots of sectors which are thriving, which are not sunset industries but are sunrise industries. We're very, very strong, as you probably know, in renewable energy. We have, in spite of the best attempts of the City of London, we have a very strong financial services sector. We're very strong in food and drink, in tourism, in life sciences. We're 5 of the world's top 200 universities, which is per head of population is more than any other country. I think crucially the powers of independence mean that we can provide incentives for companies to grow their businesses here, for Indigenous Scottish companies to invest more, create more jobs, and to attract inward investment as well. We don't currently have those levers. We don't have the ability to incentivise companies to grow their businesses here. And that's just such a crucial part of economic growth in the modern era, is being able to tailor your economic policies, your overall raft of economic policies, to provide the most attractive environment for business. We know that what we need to do as a country is grow our working age population. We know we need economic growth to do the things we want to do as a country. And I believe that we will make the right decisions and that Scotland will look forward to strong economic growth. If we'd matched the economic growth of other countries of our size for the last 30, 40 years, we would quite literally have tens of thousands more jobs in Scotland than we do currently, and we would have had much higher economic growth than has been the case as part of the UK. So the future, as I was saying earlier, the future is what we make of it, but I believe we will get those decisions right. What we know right now is that 8 out of every 10 new jobs being created in the private sector in the UK are being created in the London area. There's no incentive for a UK government, for a Westminster government, to do anything that makes Scotland a particularly attractive destination for new growth or for new businesses. I believe that we can match the achievements of other small countries. Ruth mentioned the Scandinavian countries, which have done wonderfully well in both having the highest levels of economic success of any European country, but also having that much stronger base of social justice and social equality that I think many of us in Scotland want. So I'm very confident that we will make the right decisions and that we can grow the economy. And I have every reason to believe that we can do better with making our own choices as part of the UK.
Thank you.
Can I just say that that's something that's very important for me. My son is 21 in October, and I would quite like to not be one of these families where he has to go south to get a job. I think you have to think about what the alternative is. I mean, I'm not from Scotland originally, but I've lived here for 35 years. And in all of that time, what we've done is we've hemorrhaged our young people down to the southeast because we've not had the vibrant, dynamic economy that we could. You Scots are inventors, you're engineers, you're innovative. You know, we're listening today about, on the radio, about them developing antennae so that you can have broadband without a cable from a satellite. That is being developed in Scotland. The miniature satellite that went up a week ago that came from Clyde Space. Scotland is an innovative place, and often the research and development did not take it forward because we don't matter very much. And I think the total difference is a government in Edinburgh would be looking at our businesses. The reason Germany is so strong is they work to their small and medium-sized enterprises, their Mittelstand as they call it. Family companies, small companies. They're not trying to attract some fly-by-night Japanese company that might disappear in a couple of years. They're trying to grow their own and maintain them and look after them. And you also need to remember, when we're told that we'd be safer in the bosom of the UK, is in my adult lifetime we've had a crash in every single decade. From me studying for my exams by candlelight in the 3-day week of the 70s, right through to the mother and father of them all in 2008. So we've not been safe for the last 30 years. And while our oil revenue was pouring south in the 80s, our industry, our manufacturing was being shut down. So that's something that we can turn around and actually be designing our economy, our incentives to take on apprentices or invest in your business that come to you, because for an Edinburgh government, your business is important because it's the core of our economy. You're not just up in the top left-hand corner, not mattering to anybody, which is what we are now.
Another couple of hands down here, and then I believe there's another lady up here. So could we have the gentleman over here on the left-hand side, and then the lady in the striped jumper, and then we'll come to yourself, okay?
Thank you. Philippa was talking about candlelight and 3-day weeks and so on. Cockenzie Power Station, coal-fired power station, closed in 2013. The Kincardine Power Station closed in the 1990s. Longannet Power Station, 2,400 megawatts, the second largest coal-fired power station in the UK, the third largest in the whole of Europe, is due for closure 2020. Hunterston Power Station and Torness Power Station are both due for closures in 2023. How are they going to keep the lights on? How are they going to replace them? And how are they going to pay for it?
Okay, thank you. So which member of the panel would like to take that one about the keeping the lights on, keeping the power going?
I can start, and maybe if you want to join in. I mean, I think the first thing to say, and I think the proper thing to say, is it's true within the Yes movement. You get a different answer to your question, I think, from an SNP representative, had there been political representatives tonight, than you would get from a Scottish Green Party representative. So you will get differences. Yeah. 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 So, and this is the argument around base load and being able to guarantee that you, as you say, you keep the lights on. Is your view, just to understand your question, is your view that that renewable energy sources are not sufficient in themselves? Is that your starting point? Cannot replace one of these. Right. I think, I mean, the Scottish Government's policy, and I'll state it, and it's up to us who we elect in 2016 and who we put into power in future, is to phase out nuclear power over the lifetime of the stations that of the power stations that you've referred to, so that there wouldn't be any attempt to close immediately, but they would fulfil their natural life cycle and then would not be replaced as nuclear power sources at that point. And that the combination of energy sources, including the new renewable energy sources, would not only satisfy Scotland's power needs, but would make us a net exporter of energy. Now, I'm not sufficient of an expert in this to say that I can talk through the merits of every single power source or every single energy source, but it seems to me from what I've read and what I've heard from others who are more expert than I am, that the long-term future of Scotland as a source of renewable energy is not only sufficient to make us comfortable in our own energy requirements, but that we will actually help other countries to satisfy their energy requirements also.
Even with these power stations currently in service, we have imported electricity from England over the last year. How are we going to supply other people down there?
Which electricity goes in both directions at different times.
Yes,
yeah.
We're just saying that even with all these power stations still in operation, we have had to import electricity from England at some stages during the last year. That's before the closure of these power stations. And the current renewable energy supply cannot replace even one of these power stations on its own.
You're talking about the current rather than the potential in future.
Current.
I mean,
we have 9 years to the closure of the last of these 4 power stations.
Well, so the balance that's going to have to be struck is that as we become less dependent upon carbon fueled energy, and move away from that as an energy source, that the balance is going to have to be guaranteeing energy supply while making the transition to renewable energy and to being a low carbon economy. Now, again, I think you and I are probably in the same position, is that we are going to have to trust the debate and trust the input of the various scientists who advise on this, that we will get that balance right over a period of time. I don't know that there's anything inherent in the constitutional decision that makes that more or less difficult. If there were a requirement at any time to have electricity moving in either direction across this island, then I'm sure that would be part of the arrangements that we put in place following a yes vote. I don't see that as being something that would end because Scotland had voted yes.
I think it's also perhaps important to add in the question of renewables that Scotland's in a very fortunate position in terms of its natural resources. It's got 25% of the wave power of Europe. It's got a huge amount of potential for wind power. I'm just back from Shetland, where I'm the only person I know who had to wear a thermal vest in early July. It's very windy. There's a lot of, we've got a new wave power development in the Pentland Firth, which is very exciting. We've got the most green targets of any country in the UK and most countries in Europe. And the reason we were able to make these targets, I think, is because we are so fortunate in our renewable potential. But let's just remember one of the reasons that we want to set our own priorities, and that's because we've already been here about 25 years ago. People who are chronologically gifted like me might remember Salter's Duck, which was one of the early forms of wave power. Westminster chose not to invest in it, and as a result of that, Denmark picked up that particular ball and ran with it. It's now a very successful exponent of wave power. We were going to have a carbon capture plant in the northeast of Scotland. Westminster vetoed that, and Mr Darling, I believe it was, who said no thanks to that. So, I mean, there are all kinds of things that we can do in terms of our own ingenuity and in terms of our own resources, but we can do none of them properly and geared to what we do best until and unless we have the power and we have our hands on the levers of that power.
It's just also to realise that, you know, one of the other ones which is still a little bit in its infancy is tidal power, and unlike a lot of the others, it is predictable. You have 2 tides a day with 2 races per tide, and that is at different times in different parts of Scotland. And just like the oil industry, we are going to lose the financial and economic benefit from that if we don't vote yes, because these things will be sitting on the Crown Estate, which is the shallow water around the coast. And at the moment, anything that comes to the Crown Estate just goes straight to the Treasury. It does not pass go, and we do not collect £200. So that is something that we need to realise is it's coming, it's not here yet, but the next energy boom would just, again, pour money into the coffers instead of could be pouring money into our coffers.
Now, there's a lady in here, lady in the striped jumper, and then lady up at the back. If you would, John, thank you.
Hi there. My question is just about the defence sector and the result of a yes vote. I mean, obviously there are a lot of people in this part of Scotland and different parts who are relying on jobs in the Ministry of Defence. I was just wondering if there's anything in place for people that have got jobs, you know, when there's a transition between the Ministry of Defence and, you know, whatever the Scottish...
Well, Scotland's going to need its own Ministry of Defence, so the people who are at desks will still be required. Yeah. But from a defence point of view, people need to realise we don't actually have any defence at the moment. When the Russian Navy meandered into the Moray Firth, it took Twitter and 2 days to get a response. And, you know, we need to have surveillance of our seas, particularly as the Arctic Channel has thawed out, and there's going to be a lot of traffic coming from northern Russia down through the Arctic in the summer when the ice is melted. And we need to be able to contribute to that. So our shipbuilding will benefit from that, because we will need naval Coast Guard ships, not super aircraftless carriers like we have at the moment, but ships that can actually patrol our fisheries, patrol our oil installations, and can look at drug trafficking and people trafficking and things that aren't happening. And so there will be plenty of work both for defence people and also for the shipbuilding, the actual manufacturing side of that.
Yeah. Can I make a point about this? Because I live in Kilcreggan in Argyll, and one of the less savoury things that passes by my kitchen window on a regular basis is the Trident submarine. I have been opposed to having nuclear weapons in Scottish soil since long before the referendum was a gleam in anybody's eye. I find it deeply offensive morally and actually, because Trident by definition cannot contravenes the Geneva Convention, because it cannot determine whether or not it's firing on civilians or whether or not it's going to fire on personnel. That contravenes the Geneva Convention. It contravenes, I think, every person's moral sensibilities. Now, because I live very near Faslane and Coalport bases, I'm in a kind of Bermuda Triangle there, the local population there are quite naturally quite worried there, because a lot of the people, a lot of my friends and neighbours have...
And here as well, and Beath as well.
Well, I'm sure it's exactly the same, but the Coalport base will not stop becoming a naval base. It will stop becoming a nuclear submarine base, and frankly, for me, that's a cause of major celebration.
I appreciate your answers, and I agree wholeheartedly with a lot of what you're saying. I'm just meaning on a personal level, because from speaking to people who work at these places, you know, obviously they need to have some kind of guarantee that they're going to be able to keep their jobs, or they're going to, you know, they've got some kind of security.
Yeah, the initial, if I can say something on it, I mean, the initial position, as with any other government department, is that there is a transfer of responsibility, a transfer of undertakings across from, if you're currently an employee of the UK government based in Scotland, you'd move into Scottish government employment. Now, some people may wish to continue to work for the UK, and that might be true in the defence sector, but for people who wish to transfer into being employees of the Scottish government, that's what would be an offer there. The current Scottish government have said there would be a net increase in jobs in defence in Scotland as an independent country for the reasons that my colleagues have mentioned, which is that we would actually have a defence capacity which was more suited to our needs as a country, which would be, you know, reconnaissance aircraft, you know, more ships patrolling our waters and protecting our coastline. So there would be more jobs in the defence sector. And I think that, in a sense, that's all you can say at this point, is that I think people should believe that their jobs will be secure and there'll be a net increase in defence jobs in an independent Scotland. I think the point about Trident is a very, very powerful one. Tony Blair said in his memoirs that there was no longer any defence rationale for having Trident nuclear missiles, but he didn't think a UK government would ever give them up because it becomes such an important status symbol for the UK.
Virility symbol is what you mean, I think.
What's it?
Virility symbol, I think.
Whatever kind of symbol, but essentially, again, this comes up a lot in speaking around Scotland. I spoke at the conference of Age Scotland, what used to be called Age Concern, earlier this year, and I came expecting to have a conversation about pensions, and most of the conversation was dominated by Trident, because the delegates at the Age Scotland conference were of the, as we said, they went back to
lying down in front of convoys.
They went back to Polaris, and they'd been against nuclear weapons all their lives, and it's just that one of their big reasons for voting yes was to get rid of nuclear weapons. I mean, we can all in this hall think of an awful lot of things we would rather spend hundreds of millions of pounds on than our contribution towards entirely unnecessary and immoral weapons.
And there's another PS to that, Blair, which is people keep talking about job losses, which of course are desperately difficult for people to contend with. But let's just remember that we've been salami slicing the armed forces constantly. Scotland has lost tens of thousands of jobs in the armed forces, and one of the main reasons it's losing tens of thousands of jobs in the armed forces, good regular jobs, is because we've got this ridiculous fantasy about chucking £75 billion at more Trident. Think of all the proper equipment you could have for people who are relevant to today's kind of threats, terror threats, if we weren't paying money into that black hole.
I think the other thing is also to remember that you know, Faslane is much more than Trident, and there's only approximately 500 jobs that are absolutely linked to Trident. The rest of the jobs are linked to the naval base, and the plan is that that will be Scotland's deep water naval base, and therefore they will still have their jobs. And from people I know who work there, they say that a lot of the Trident-related jobs, the people actually come in Monday to Friday or Monday to Thursday. They don't live there with their families. So they will go back home. They don't live here. They haven't put down roots or been part of that.
That's a very important point, actually. 85% of the people who work in these bases come in and out. And it's a running sore in my local economy, because the local economy, the people who might expect to get benefits from it in terms of buying goods and services locally, they get, I'm going to use another technical term, seriously pissed off by the fact that the bulk of the workforce doesn't live locally and doesn't shop locally.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. I love the story that, is it Philippa, that you're sharing about the NHS and the effect that devolution has had, which has given you the ability to start making your own decisions within the UK. I think one thing that the referendum has done is to really bring that to the fore about maximum devolution and federalisation, so different options from complete independence. I just want to ask, what makes you think that we've come to the end of that road? Or is this a good point where actually there's further to go?
Well, I think that, to be honest, we've come to the road where we have the choice they gave us. I think when you see the people, because I've no problem with people who say, you know, hand on heart, I believe in the UK and Britain for whatever reason. The people I worry about are the people who say, I'd love Scotland to be independent, but I'm afraid. I'm not sure if we can. We're not big enough. And those are the people who are going to feel really cheated when they discover that a lot of the scare stories aren't true if they have voted no. But they could have won this referendum easy peasy by putting Devo Max, because we would all have voted that in the second question. So we'd have voted independence, yes or no, yes. Devo Max or status quo, we'd have said Devo Max. And Devo Max would have won hands down 75%. So why did they not put it? Because they would have still had the United Kingdom, and we would have kept all of the economy. They would have had defence and foreign affairs. It was the UK government who would not allow that. The SNP government said, you can have Devo Max, and they said no. So federalism is not on offer. What we're being offered with the extra powers is actually extra responsibilities. We can spend a lot of money collecting a wee bit more of our income tax, which is the most expensive to collect. But the lucrative taxes that come when you stimulate and invest your economy, so VAT, corporation tax, the oil revenue, petrol duty, whiskey duty, and Crown Estate, straight to London. So to me, we are being offered Devo minima as opposed to Devo Max. And that's down to UK. They could have said, we're going to give you a Devo Max option, and they did not.
That's why I think it's absolutely brilliant what's happening, because I think the whole of the UK is able now to see Scotland rise up and have a voice and say, we do want to have more power. We do understand with power comes responsibility. And so I think this whole process is making folk in Westminster, you know, sit up and say, we need to really think through giving them more within the UK. And I've just had a paper. I've been writing emails, and they've actually written back and actually stated to me, yes, we are now committed to going down that route. And so I think there's been huge benefits in this debate, and it's just the question for me as to whether or not we give up that possibility by voting independence.
I don't see it that way at all. I'll come to you in a second. In that I think that if we're an independent country like Southern Ireland, that is part of the Common Travel Agreement and part of the, you know, they meet and they share a lot of ideas, I think you will get closer to a respectful relationship between the countries that would actually inspire the north of England, who voted against an assembly, that they will start to rise up and say, well, actually, we want a bit of what they have.
Sorry. Thank you very much.
Sorry. I just wanted to finish.
Just add on.
Sorry.
I stole it from the back one.
I've only got two short things to say. One is that the promises that are being made now suddenly, post not giving us Devo Max, the promises that have been made suddenly are vague and unstated, and that's because the three parties who are in favour of the status quo can't agree amongst themselves about what to give us. So I wouldn't trust that for a nanosecond. And the only party in Scotland which is wholly in favour of federalism, a federal UK, and always has been, is the Liberal Democrats. And are you going to put next month's wages on them winning the next election?
Just very briefly to add to what Ruth said there, I think I don't doubt the sincerity of a great many of the people in the anti-independence parties in Scotland who say that that they think an enhanced form of devolution is the best answer. And I know from some people I know personally they believe in an enhanced form of devolution. I just think we need to be very realistic about what appetite there'll be at Westminster in the next few years. If Scotland votes no, I mean, people are already saying that the next, leaving aside what's happening in Scotland, the next UK general election, everyone is saying is the hardest to call. It's the toughest to call of any UK general election in living memory. It's going to be very, very closely and keenly contested. what appetite is there going to be among the Westminster parties and at Westminster post that general election during that campaign to get back into the issue of what's bugging Scotland? Because, you know, essentially I think that is how people will look at it. We've spent several years debating this. That's finished, and now we want to move on to this next chapter, which is about an enhanced form of devolution. I think the next Westminster Parliament is going to be so dominated by the issue of the UK's relations with the European Union, leading up to the in-out referendum in 2017. That is now such a dominant theme. Again, this is thing about being, to some extent, already with a separate news agenda in Scotland. We probably are not fully aware of just how dominant that issue now is south of the border, the issue of the EU in, out, and what should the relationship be. The notion that we're going to get an awful lot of oxygen for a further debate about the Scottish Constitution over the next several years, I just think, I mean, while I'm all for optimism, I just think that I find that incredible, and I think people should take a very, very cautious and sceptical view about whether any enhanced form of devolution is likely to survive Westminster in the next few years.
They're bored sick of it.
I'm very aware that time is getting on. James, at 9:30 we've got to be out?
No.
Is that
9.
No, 9. Oh, and we're way past time. Oh, sorry.
That's why he's making noises.
He was just tapping.
He's saying there's one there. Is it? No. Somebody at the back who's been waiting for ages.
Someone at the back.
My question actually comes off of the EU one. In your meetings as such, I think we should go for the euro, right? I've just come back from Ireland. It's on the GDP thing here, 7th on the list, Ireland. It's just come through a recession. They had the guts to do through civil war to succeed from the Great Britain. We are being civilised here and being asked to discuss separation as civilised people. But what I'm asking about is in terms of Europe, because the question that you were asking related to European, what is the feeling within Scotland about possibly with the UK government, and it was the Tories basically, taking us out of EU because they are isolating us within another big marketplace. So what is the panel's feeling? Does Scotland really want to be part of the EU?
Okay, thank
well,
you.
speaking personally, I do. It's a huge market. One of the great ironies of this debate is that lots of people in England are desperately keen to hang on to our union and desperately keen to leap out of the other one. I can't quite see where the logic is there.
Well, I would have to say, as my husband's German, as some of you might know, I really would like to stay in the EU or he'll have to go home. I think the EU is something that, for all of its warts, for our farmers, our fishers, if we actually had a voice, if our minister is in there arguing quotas, arguing support, Scotland gets the most pitiful rural funding from Europe because we have no voice. So we could get a lot more out of Europe and we gain from having interaction. Scots have always been Europhiles and I think we would remain that.
Thank you very much. Now, I am led to believe we are completely out of time. I didn't realise that we had really run over. So all I want to do is say thank you. Did you have something to say, Blair?
No, all I would say is, thank you for coming along. It's some terrific questions, and I can't speak for my colleagues. I'm not sort of just rushing straight out of the hall. So if there's somebody who had a question that you didn't get a chance to ask, or you don't like asking questions in front of 100+ people, then I'll hang around for a few minutes.
That's great. Just been given something to read. So before we finish and before I say more thank you, sorry Philippa, I will read this.
I was passing you your glass, or my glass.
My glasses, that would be a bit better. That'll work. Please announce. Scott Matthew, a foreign exchange specialist, will speak on Thursday, 24th of July at 7:30 p.m. at the Yes Shop in Largs in Glasgow. Oh, sorry, I've got my specs on too. In Gallowgate Square in Largs. You'll know the Yes Shop. It's in Gallowgate Square. You just need to walk in and see it's up in the far corner. It's a smashing wee shop. Please visit it. So what I want to do, before I say thank you to everybody, I'll say we're having a referendum cafe in here on The 23rd, it's Women for Independence, so I'm sorry all the men who are here, you're not invited. Oh. This time, it's women only. Did I say July? Sorry. No, I just think you missed out the month. Oh, sorry, I probably did. Thank you, Fee. 23rd of August, we know we've already had one earlier on this year, and it was a big success, but we felt that a lot of women commented they were a bit uncomfortable with some of the things. So if you would like to come along to visit our Yes Referendum Cafe, we would be very pleased for you to do that. 2:30. I didn't know that we made up the time. I thought it was 2 o'clock. Sorry, I'll be here at 2 o'clock. Anyway, all it is left to me is to say thank you very much. Our speakers have been great. They've been really very, very good. I think they've answered all of the points very, very comprehensively, but the audience have been terrific. You've been very interesting, stimulating. You've also been extremely courteous, and that's a big bonus in these things. As I said at the beginning, it's not a political platform, not for long political speeches. You've kept your questions tight and to the point, and the answers have been very, very interesting. So thank you to the panellists, thank you to the audience, and thank you to all of the people who have organised this. There were people who were out doing flyers. I was away in Denmark and folk were running around doing flyers that I should have been doing. So thank you to everybody for that. And also thank you to the hall caretaker for putting up with us, for staying here so long, and also for making sure that we had plenty of this is definitely the last thing. If you want to volunteer to help out with the Yes campaign, the next few weeks are going to be extremely intense. I believe James is signing people up, or taking anyone who wants to volunteer, taking the details of anyone who wants to volunteer. But thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, Margaret. That was great. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's really good. Thank you, Philippa. That was lovely. Well done. Excellent.
My sentence right now.
Well, usually they are. Come round the table.